Here's some more multiplication with radicals, and these are a little bit more complicated. But again, whenever you see it like this, you can use the general process of squaring a binomial, but if that's a little confusing, just what I say is when in doubt, write it out. In other words, when we square something, we're just going to multiply it times itself. And now we're going to just use the FOIL process. So first term times first term. And you could write this out, but, well, I'll just write it out so you can see it. 4 square roots of 3 times 4 square roots of 3. And that's our first term times our first term. And then we've got the outside and inside. And here's the outside terms. Negative 4 square roots of 3 times, because a positive times a negative is negative 2 square roots of 5. And then the inside term is going to be the same thing because it's a negative times a positive. 2 square roots of 5 times 4 square roots of 3. And I'm writing out all these steps for you so you can see this. And these are the same, because multiplication is commutative. Doesn't matter what order we multiply, as long as we remember the integrity of the SIGNs, the signs. And then last terms, a negative times a negative is a positive. And then I've got 2 square roots of 5 times 2 square roots of 5. Now, some of these things you could kind of work out in your head, but I'm showing all the steps. Now, if I simplify this, I could move these together, but I won't do that. But 4 times 4 is 16. And the square root of 3 times the square root of 3 is just the square root of 9, which is 3. And then over here I've got negative. 4 times 2 is 8. And the square root of 3 times the square root of 5 is just the square root of 3 times 5, which is 15. And again, minus in the same thing. 2 times 4 is 8. And the square root of 15. And 2 times 2 is 4. And the square root of 5 times the square root of 5 is the square root of 25, which is just 5. Now we've got numerical terms, purely numerical terms, because 16 times 3 is 48. And I've got a negative 8, like what's negative 8 cats and negative 8 cats? That's negative 16 cats. So negative 8 square root of 15 and negative 8 square root of 15 is negative 16 the square root of 15. And then 4 times 5 is 20. And then you're going to simplify your numerical terms. 48 plus 20 is what? 68. Minus 16 square roots of 5. So there's your, 15. There's your final answer. Okay, so some of these things simplify out really nicely. And that's a little more complicated one, but like I said, some of these things you could do in your head. You could say 4 times 4 is 16, square root of 3 times square root of 3 is 3. And then you say I just have negative 8 square root of 15 and negative 8 square root of 15 is negative 16 times square root of 15. So you can combine those, and then positive 4 times 5, 20. So some of these things you could work out, but sometimes, like I said, it's when in doubt, write it out. So that's a pretty challenging problem, so look at that, make sure you have good control over that. And then we have what we call conjugates. And conjugates are very interesting. Conjugates are radicals that are the same, except the sign in between them is opposite. So here's an example. Now, these both are radical numbers, okay? They're actually irrational numbers because we can't take the exact square roots of these. Can't be done. But what happens when we multiply these conjugates together? Let's see what happens. This is very interesting. So I'll multiply it out, and I use the FOIL method. And what's the square root of 6 times the square root of 6? Well, that's the square root of 36, which is just 6. And then I've got negative, positive times a negative is a negative, the square root of 6 times the square root of 5, which is the square root of 30. And then positive, the square root of 5 times the square root of 6, which is also the square root of 30. And a positive times a negative is a negative. And the square root of 5 times the square root of 5 is the square root of 25, which is just 5. Now this is the same thing as, well, what's 6 minus 5? That's just 1. Minus, and this is the square root of 30, minus the square root of 30, plus the square root of 30. But what's negative something added to the positive of that something? Well, these are just opposites. So square root of 30 minus square root of 30 is 0, so this is just 1. So when we multiply these conjugates, even though they're both irrational numbers, we get a rational number. So conjugates are very useful, especially when we're trying to rationalize denominators. So this is an interesting multiplication you want to really kind of remember. Okay. And I'll just do one more. We have time for one more, I think. Oh, these are conjugates. So this is another example. I just picked this one out. Well, let's do it. We can do it. So, and we can kind of skip some steps here. Square root of 13, square root of 13 is 13, right? And this is going to be minus the square root of 13 times 3, so that's going to be negative, and 13 times 3 is 39, square root of 39. And this is going to be plus the square root of 39, and they're opposites. And then a positive times a negative is a negative, and the square root of 3 times the square root of 3 is 3. So these are opposites, so we just have 13 minus 3, which is just 10. So you could do these a little shorter. All right? Okay, so I think that probably gets everything in a nutshell. Just write these things out and use the FOIL process, and like I say, when in doubt, write it out.